Revelation chapter 1, verse 1 of your Bible, the Apostle John literally is given on the Isle of Patmos a revelation for the end of the age. Notice what it says in verse 1. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. The phrase shortly come to pass in the Greek language literally means when you come to a distinct time in history, God's time in history. Then all of a sudden, the book of Revelation will literally explode onto the scene of those lives of the people on earth in that day. But what is the time setting for this time when the book of Revelation will explode onto the newspapers, onto the CNN, the daily newscast of our lives? Revelation 1 verse 10 literally tells us when these things will happen. It says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. The phrase on the Lord's day, when you look it up in the Greek concordance, Strong Concordance, is a mistranslation. The word on is a preposition, and it could have been translated one of four separate prepositions. It could have even been on the Lord's day, at the Lord's day, by the Lord's day, or in the Lord's day. It means a place in time when you look it up in the Greek language. So the only one of the four prepositions that can fit to show the time setting for the book of Revelation is the preposition in. It should have said in the Lord's day. Over 30 places in the Old Testament of your Bible, you'll find the phrase the Lord's day, or the day of the Lord, showing those events that are going to transpire at the very close of the age, when Jesus Christ prophesied that all things would come to a conclusion in that time period. Notice now in chapter 6 of Revelation verse 2, it's talking about various horses. They're known as the four horses of the apocalypse. In verse 2 it says, I saw and behold a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. So here is religious deception coming in the guise or in the name and by the authority of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. He would look like a white horse, because even Satan's ministers are transformed into an angel of light, according to 2 Corinthians. Now notice verse 3 and 4 of Revelation chapter 6. This is called the red horse of the apocalypse. And when he had opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, Come and see. And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword. The red horse of the apocalypse only had two reasons for existing. Number one, they were to take world peace from planet Earth. World revolution under the Illuminati. It was laid out in 1872 by Albert Pike of Little Rock, Arkansas, head of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, and Mazzini of Italy, who was the head of all political and revolutionary activities. So they used the banner of communism to take peace from the earth. They said, first we'll take Central Europe. Then secondly, they said, we will take the masses of Asia. Thirdly, they said, we'll surround the United States, which will be the last bastion of capitalism. And remember, capitalism was one of the problems of the world, the environment and economics, because they feel if they can change the world, it's got to be through the environment and economics. And they leave out the Holy Spirit of God. So Russia was overthrown in 1917 and 1919 to become the seen enemy of the rest of the world. Central Europe then When Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin met at the Conference of Yalta that ended World War II, literally signed a document that placed Poland, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Romania, Ukraine, Georgia, and all the other Balkan states into the communist orbit. So the first prediction came true. Yes, Central Europe fell into the hands of the Illuminati or international communism. Second, they said they would take the masses of Asia. In 1949 and 50, finally China fell. Then North Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Burma, Tibet, and all the other Asian nations. Then the Illuminati said, while the colonial governments of the world, such as Great Britain, Germany, France, Dutch, and so on, those who held colonies in Africa and in the Far East, South America, Central America, they would work on a program to set these colonies free. When they did, they would overthrow those self-governing colonies before they learned self-rule, and they could stabilize their governments. So we've seen Central Europe, Africa, we've seen all those nations fall to international communism under the iron grip of the Illuminati. The United States, meanwhile, has been surrounded by Cuba, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and then right across the barren straits of Alaska, you find the vast reaches of Siberia, which is under the control of Russia and international communism. So yes, the United States is being surrounded. They wanted the United States of America to collapse from within. But if they could not cause it to collapse from within, then they would prepare a nuclear strike to destroy the United States so that it would fit itself into world government. Notice in the 1930s, a declaration by a man by the name of Dmitry Manuelewski. He was a professor at the Lenin School of Political Warfare in Moscow. I quote, "War to the hilt between communism and capitalism is inevitable. Today, of course, we are not strong enough to attack. Our time will come in 30 to 40 years. To win, we shall need the element of surprise. The Western world will have to be put to sleep." And this is exactly what's been happening since the sixth glasnost and perestroika was called in 1985. They've been putting the United States to sleep. So we shall begin by launching the most spectacular peace movement on record. There shall be electrifying overtures like the reunification of Germany, the tearing down of the Berlin Wall, and unheard of concessions. The capitalist countries, stupid and decadent, will rejoice to cooperate to their own destruction. They will leap at another chance to be friends. As soon as their guard is down, that means disarmament in America. We shall smash them with a clenched fist. End of quote. Have we seen the United States of America began to disarm under George Bush and continuing under a man that was elected President of the United States who was a draft dodger from the Vietnam conflict and who led peace marches in front of the American embassy in London, England, trying to get us out of the war? And then he spoke on Veterans Day about all the veterans that gave their lives for our safety. What hypocrisy. The very man that led the fight against our involvement is the very one who gave the speech on that day. We did not know when this is going to happen. Manuelewski said when they become superior in military apparatus, then they would create a surprise attack against the United States. But you know what? Through the centuries, God has always revealed certain things to His people. They have been through dreams, through visions, and God has allowed His people to know things that the rest of the world has not necessarily known, so that they could prepare themselves in advance if they're listening to what the Spirit says to the church. I'm only going to give you a simple possibility in passing in this message today. But I personally believe that it is a good probability. On November 6th of 1995, between midnight and 1 a.m., someone's sitting in the room right now of this taping, whose wife happens to lead singing and play the piano on occasions, had a legitimate vision. It did not contradict anything in the Bible as we reviewed that vision that I'm aware of. We tried the Spirit, as it says in 1 John 4, so that we would know whether this vision was of God or not. After all, He's given us several over the last 2 years. It so disturbed this individual that he woke up in the night by this vision. But even after he woke up, the vision continued. And just because he was awake, it didn't stop. I'm not going into all the details at this time. I'm only going to summarize the basics of this particular vision. One of the statements was that many of God's people had been warned about what is coming, but it didn't seem to matter to them. It was at night, and Russia launched missiles across the North Pole. One hit to the east of Texas. We don't know where, but to the east of it, probably in Louisiana along the New Madrid fault line. Another in New York, and it was during football season, and they said there wouldn't be a game this week. None of these missiles hit the state of Texas. It was the season when people wore jackets, not necessarily heavy coats, but just light jackets. Bill Clinton was still President of the United States. Mr. Bill Clinton, and we will see his term expire after 1996, unless he wins the next presidential election. If he loses, I believe there is a great possibility and probability that this vision could come true by that time. If he's reelected, then there is no time setting for this particular vision. So one of three scenarios could happen. Number one, in the fall of 1995, there could be nuclear war in the United States, a surprise attack by Russia. This seems highly unlikely because at the time of this taping, we're so far into the fall. The second possibility is that in the fall of 1996, either before the elections or even after the elections, there could be a surprise attack. The key to this is Mr. Bill Clinton, according to this vision, went on national television and CNN and responded by stating that the United States would not retaliate. This means that Mr. Bill Clinton is either in office or will use this, if it does happen, as an excuse to suspend the Constitution and remain in office as a dictator. A third possibility, the American people are so deceived that they will re-elect Mr. Clinton. If this is the case, we do not have a time setting for this vision. I personally cannot see after talking with many, many people on the streets wherever I've gone, anyone voting for Bill Clinton again. However, the American people can be fooled and have been on many occasions in the past. According to this vision, after this attack, surprise attack, there were military vehicles carrying soldiers everywhere. Not tanks, but just military type vehicles to carry personnel. Helicopters were flying overhead everywhere in America. So I would like to ask a question. Could this be America spelled with a K? The beginning of that time of occupation by the United Nations that I've referred to in so many sermons before? Another person 1,000 miles away sat up in the middle of the night in his bed and said, I heard thundering in my brain. There was no audible voice in the room, but I sat up in my bed and it said, Satan is trying to deceive you. There is a place of safety for my people. This happened in November of 1995. I've only summarized the words of these two individuals. I believe that God is getting a certain group of people ready and prepared so that when all these end times events occur, they'll be ready to meet it head on. Notice Revelation chapter 6, verse 5 and 6. And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, Come and see. And I beheld, and lo, a black horse. And he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. And see you hurt not the oil and the wine. Notice this is famine, or a combination of famine, the lack of food being grown, and an economic downturn or collapse on a worldwide scale. Even in what is called the heartland of America, the Great Plains, where the wheat belt, corn belt, that supplies so much of the food for America. In the summer of 1995, there was famine. There was rain. See, you can have famine with too much rain that rots the crops, and you can't even go out into the fields to plant. And therefore, there is no growing season. And then in Africa, it's been in the grips of famine for several years. So these things are ripe right now on the world scene. And what would happen if a giant comet of some kind were to come close to planet Earth? So close that it would literally create winds that would be up to 100 and 150 miles an hour, and it would totally destroy a growing season for 1 year. They've spotted such a comet that's coming from the depths of space, and it's already traveled millions of miles. It's not on a collision course with the world, but it is, according to them, coming so close that the scenario for the possibility of losing an entire growing season could be possible. And if that were to happen, then this horse of the apocalypse could literally come into place. And there would be no doubt in any of our minds that it would be true. Then in Revelation chapter 6, verse 7 and 8, And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, Come and see. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death. Notice death. It didn't say how necessarily the death took place until the latter part of the verse. And it said hell, which in the Greek language is Hades, followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with a sword, that's warfare, continued revolutionary wars, with hunger, lack of food, economic collapse, so people can't buy the commodities that are available, and with death. What is a possibility of this death? Could it be disease epidemics? Because remember, in Matthew 24, Jesus said one of the things that would happen would be pestilences that would lead right up to the end of the age, and we could know that we are at the very close of the age. We all know, or should know by now, about the splitting of the T-cell in Fort Detrick, Maryland on an Army base. Results, the AIDS epidemic that was deliberately launched into the homosexual communities in San Francisco, California, and 3 other selected areas. Epidemic is now in the world. But there is something yet more sinister that has been unleashed. The American people have yet to learn that indeed germ warfare was used on our servicemen and women during the Gulf War. And the greatest tragedy, that it was a joint venture with the United States government and Iraq. This information will shock, surprise, and sadden the American public. But yet, the worst is yet to come. America does not know what has been happening behind closed doors in the capital of the United States. Decisions that have been made, chemical and biological, which is germ warfare programs of mass destruction, were literally formulated and made in Boca Raton, Florida, and in Houston, Texas, by international terrorists working with United States intelligence. And the proof is there, and it's obtainable. One of the special strains or strands of this hydrogen cyanide is called Prussian Blue. And it was being tested on gas mask filters at the Florida Product Ingredient Technology Plant for gas mask penetration, an entire year before the Gulf War ever began. This was the government of the United States, which had set up a CIA front organization in joint communications with Iraqi terrorists, and created Prussian Blue, and then saw to it that they manufactured this, and it was so small it could penetrate gas masks that they were furnishing for American and United Nations personnel in the Gulf War. The Product Ingredient Technology Plant was financed and engineered by the same Dr. Barbuti, who was declared dead in 1969 as a terrorist. And all of a sudden, he was resurrected from the dead. Apparently, his name was Ishan Barbuti International. That was his company, abbreviated IBI. He was the very person in charge of building the Pharma 150 chemical biological complex at Rabta, Libya. And Libya, remember, has 16 to 18 terrorist training camps inside the borders of that country. And here is a man working in joint communique with the CIA in the United States of America to literally build these chemicals, biological warfare agents. Former President George Bush, James Baker III, his Secretary of State, John Deutsch, at that time our CIA director, and John Deutsch was a former chemistry professor at MIT University. And he was on the Defense Science Board, which used a secret report in 1980 urging United States production of binary weapons. These are chemical and biological weapons of mass destruction, which had already been outlawed by the Geneva Convention and was not to be manufactured and used in any way. These three men had financial interest in some of the companies which developed, sold, transferred these weapons to Iraq. Yes, while our commander-in-chief at that time, President George Bush, was literally arming Saddam Hussein with these weapons of mass destruction. And 2 years later, knowing that they were going to place American forces in the Middle East, this was already on the drawing board well in advance when they started building the plant in Florida and producing the biological agents. Former President George Bush, along with Brent Scowcroft, remember he was a part of the National Security Agency, and Henry Kissinger, all of these individuals had something to do with the Middle East at that time, along with United States intelligence, were behind the testing, the use of Prussian Blue, which literally rendered our troops defenseless against the biological agents that were used in tests and then used in the Gulf War. And this was a war which was planned for that very purpose, the testing of biological warfare agents on at least 28 nations of the world to spread it around the globe. This was called for 2 years in advance of the war. Remember, one of the problems that the Illuminati and those working for world government state is the world is overpopulated and they need at least 50% of the world's population to be exterminated. What better way than to produce a chemical biological agent that would be airborne just by breathing on someone or being in the front of somebody that coughs, and they could spread it to another individual. Haven't we already seen the movie Outbreak, where they told us what they were doing? They even have agents that are named after the city or the country of Zaire. They already have them. They're in their laboratory. Certain specific vaccines were grown several years in advance of the Middle East War. To be exact, under the auspices of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at Fort Detrick, Maryland, they had 2 horses, one of them named Abe and another one named First Flight, which they produced cultures from to produce their plasma to offset as a vaccine to overcome this bacteria that would be spread to our boys and those of 27 other nations. They wanted to have a vaccine or an antidote in advance for a specific purpose. And that purpose is only for those who will submit to the New World Order. Then they will be healed if they come down with the biological agents and the bacteria that they've spread. There is an agent that's abbreviated PB. I'll try to pronounce it. It's pridostamine bromide. This is a nerve agent, and it's a pre-treatment, and it was in a pre-treatment pill that was given to our boys that went into the Middle East by the Department of Defense. This is a nerve gas. Our State Department, our government continues to deny that they even use this particular agent, nerve gas, for any of our military that went into the Middle East and the Desert Storm. They've denied it. However, what is called NBC, and this is not a television network, this is nuclear, biological, chemical logs. This is where they have to enter into their log books any use of nuclear, biological, or chemical agents directly from the logbooks of CENTCOM, which is the Central Command of Schwarzkopf. His personal logbooks, when they were examined, proved that the Israeli military police confirmed that GF nerve gas was used by the Iraqis in their Scud missiles over the air, and it was used in the pills and in the treatment given to our military personnel before they ever went overseas. Why does our government continually deny it? The NBC logs also proves that Schwarzkopf was given the authority to use our own chemical and biological weapons in the Middle East against the Iraqis. There are Gulf War veterans who will testify. They want to remain anonymous until they're given an opportunity to testify under oath that they have seen the chemicals and the biological agents. They handled them, but many of them have already died since coming back from the Middle East. The Department of Defense now says that parts of the NBC nuclear, biological, chemical logbooks were accidentally destroyed. Can you believe it? Just like the evidence of the front door at Waco, Texas, a huge door just happened to disappear with all the bullet holes coming from the outside in, proving the BATF were the guilty agents and not the Branch Davidians. But every time the government of the United States is caught with their hand in the cookie jar, all the evidence conveniently disappears. Now do we understand why there has to be an outside investigation? Because the government will never investigate itself. It will always obscure the evidence because they can be tried for treason if there is evidence. A man by the name of Peter Kawaja, who was a security specialist, was awarded a $1 million contract to provide a computer-based system of security for this PIT plant that manufactured the chemicals. He became very suspicious because of certain things that were happening there. He provided the bodyguards and so on for the leading people of this IBI, this Ishan Barbuti International Corporation. Kawaja was then asked to install hydrogen cyanide detection systems. This made it very suspicious in his mind because hydrogen cyanide is lethal if taken in high enough doses. So he became suspicious. He took his concerns to the CIA, the FBI, and to the United States Customs offices. He actually operated for the government of the United States under a code name because he was told that these people at the Ishan Barbuti International Corporation were international terrorists. So he went underground as he was carrying out his security operations. And the government, he was told, was going to prosecute these terrorists. This was in 1989, prior to any war that occurred in 1990 and 1991, or prior to any individual losing their lives in the Gulf War. Kawaja soon found, however, that the United States intelligence and the United States government was acting in a joint venture with these same terrorists. Kawaja obtained video and audio recordings of these terrorists, the federal agents, and even politicians who went there and who called in to there from the United States government, London, England, Baghdad in Iraq. along with paper documents that he had in his possession. He had intercepted fax transmissions originating from Switzerland regarding the Commodity Credit Corporation, which has been involved in the transfer of these chemical biological agents from the United States to Iraq. He wanted to believe that the entire United States government was not involved in this conspiracy. He couldn't believe that our government would do such a thing. It had to be just simple individuals trying to make a fast buck and get rich. So Khawaja sent a Federal Express package to code name M323CF at the National Security Agency on July 16th of 1990. Khawaja issued a warning of Iraqi intelligence operating inside the United States government and inside our borders, and in very close proximity to a United States classified military facility. And then he asked the fatal questions for himself. Number one, is our military in a joint venture with IBI to develop chemical biological weapons for the United States? There was silence. No answer. And then the big question, number two. He asked, does the president, meaning George Bush at that time, know? Once again, there was an excuse used. George Bush used the excuse once before, I was left out of the loop and knew nothing about illegal activities. So once again, it was used again. The war was planned. It went forward just like they had planned it. However, 8 federal armed agents with automatic weapons raided Mr. Peter Khawaja's offices of his International Security Group in 1990. They sequestered him under armed guard for 4 hours. They removed boxes of documents, tapes, and evidence against not only foreign terrorists, but more importantly, against federal agents and numerous persons and politicians, all the way to the President of the United States. All documented on videos, fax transmissions, cassette tapes, conversations on telephone. It was all in these boxes. The search warrant, to show you how important this is that I'm discussing with you today, the search warrant and the affidavit for search of Khawaja's headquarters actually came under the War Powers Act. They didn't go down to a federal judge and get an order, a search warrant. They got an International Emergency Economic War Powers Act in order to go in, and it was signed by President George Bush of the United States government. He has the document, Peter Khawaja, showing the signature of President Bush on it. Mr. Khawaja tried an expose to tell the American people about these crimes that were going on. As Gulf veterans began to come home, they began to get sick and they began to die. And currently over 7,000 veterans out of the nearly 1 million that went into the Middle East have already died. Many of their family members have already died. 2 out of 3 children born to Gulf War veterans that came back and that was exposed to the bacteria, the chemical biological warfare agents, 2 out of 3 of those children were born missing a leg, both legs, 1 eye missing in their head, or both arms missing and their hands attached to their shoulders. 2 out of 3 that went into the Middle East and came back. And yet, we cannot get this message out to the American people. When he tried to tell all this, he received a telephone call from a Mr. John Scheibel, Subcommittee on International Economic Policy and Trade. And it was referring to arming of Iraq with our own chemical agents under CIA auspices. And Mr. Khawaja actually recorded that conversation, and he has it on tape. Here's what Scheibel said, quote, "Who are you more afraid of, George Bush or Saddam Hussein?" End of quote. Khawaja replied, "George Bush." Scheibel immediately said to him, and I quote once again, excuse me, "Do not try him in the media." End of quote. And he hung up. He was given a warning by a government official not to expose George Bush and the government of the United States concerning their building a complex to produce agents of mass destruction in Houston, Texas, and Boca Raton, Florida. Within 3 months, Peter Khawaja's wife, Eileen Khawaja, died. She died in a plane crash with a senator who was going. One of the agents called Khawaja a little later to deliver a message. Mr. Khawaja's life and freedom was threatened numerous times by government workers, all documented either by recordings of the radio conversations or in police reports. However, the FBI, who was informed, never once investigated one of the reports made to them. Not one. The affidavit for search of his business headquarters 4 years later was finally unsealed. All of the documents that were carted out of his offices. Mr. Khawaja finally got all the documents back after 4 years of being tied up in the courts. No one thought he would live long enough to ever have it unsealed to reveal it to the public. That affidavit and other government documents sworn to under penalty of perjury, which is lying to a grand jury, and that's exactly what they convicted one of the agents in the State Department of the United States when he denied being a communist, and they proved he was. And they sent him to prison. Alger Hiss. So here were men under perjury. Federal agents themselves proved, and the United States government knew what was going to take place in this war with Iraq. They knew it in advance. Here are some of the things that in this federal indictment, federal agents testified to before a grand jury. They provided their own evidence of gas mask penetration at this PIT plant in Boca Raton, Florida. Federal agents provided their own evidence of the cyanide plant and the use of cyanide on the people in the city of Boca Raton, Florida. They provided their own documents that Dr. Barbuti had given to them that these biological agents were going to be used against American troops in a war in the Middle East. And that United States terrorist acts on U.S. citizens was also planned. And that's why they had to plant and were manufacturing these agents. Not only was it going to be used against our boys and 28 or 27 other countries and the United Nations troops to spread it around the world, but it was going to be used in the streets of America against our own citizens. And this was documents provided by the federal agents themselves. No wonder they had to seal those documents. Federal agents provided their own evidence that Barbuti had established chemical warfare production capability at a facility identified as Product Ingredient Technology in Boca Raton, Florida. Federal agents also provided their own evidence that Barbuti owned specialty chemical companies and a company in Europe identified as Crosslink in Belgium. Now remember, these were federal agents, their own testimony. Federal agents also provided in their own evidence that Ishan Barbuti was supplying military items to Iraq, which was illegal. All of this and more was sworn to by federal agents in 1990. Yet all of it, and all the evidence that was taken under an illegal search warrant from Peter Kawaja in his offices, was sealed and made secret from America. And the President and Commander-in-Chief at that time, George Bush, went ahead with a war with Iraq, and knowingly placing sons, daughters, husbands, and wives of American citizens in harm's way, knowing they would be sprayed with these biological agents. None of this evidence was ever presented to the grand jury in order to indict anyone. It was sealed. Yet Peter Kawaja, who was subpoenaed to appear as the star witness for the government, supposedly against Barbuti and the terrorists, was not even allowed to answer pertinent questions that the jurors wanted to ask him. And when Kawaja attempted to tell the truth to the jurors, the Assistant United States Attorney Thomas O'Malley shut down the grand jury and dismissed them, and dismissed Mr. Peter Kawaja, and now motioned in a federal court to drop all of the lawsuit and all of this information. And you know, it's so interesting to me that they transferred all of this information, all the documents that was not returned to Peter Kawaja, to the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. I just wonder why there was an explosion at that building. I wonder if it wasn't used to cover up something that was transpiring in the government of the United States, that if it was brought to the forefront as ABC television went down to interview Mr. Peter Kawaja, after the interview was over and he asked them when they were going to air it, they said, "We can't air this. It would topple the government of the United States." No evidence obtained in the raid against Peter Kawaja was ever presented to the grand jury. Yet, the United States government considered Kawaja's evidence so critical that a War Powers Act affidavit search warrant was used to seize all the evidence from his offices. Instead of presenting it to America and prosecuting the terrorists that the United States government itself proved in their own sworn affidavits, our government sealed all of the evidence so that no one in America will be able to ever know unless they talk with Peter Kawaja personally. While the Department of Defense and the Veterans Administration continues to deny the existence of the Gulf War illness syndrome, and veterans are dying by the thousands, the United States government, in a separate action, responded to Mr. Kawaja's lawsuit that he filed against some of the agents involved in 1994. And the government states the following, I quote, that criminal investigation is ongoing and is centered around persons involved in the manufacture and shipment of lethal and illegal chemicals to be used by terrorist nations against the United States. End of quote. The United States Attorney is right now trying to get Kawaja's lawsuit dismissed, claiming the government has an ongoing investigation. Yet all the evidence exists right now in those boxes to prosecute all the criminals and all the federal agents involved. There is no ongoing investigation. There is an ongoing cover-up. This is only a tool saying there is an ongoing investigation so that Kawaja's evidence will remain in national security, and you and I and the rest of America will never be able to see the full extent of the evidence against those in our own government. By claiming that there is an ongoing investigation, our government can keep secret its crimes for indefinite period of time. However, in their same breath, in this response to Kawaja, they have admitted that the Department of Defense continues to deny that our troops were harmed by chemical biological weapons made in the United States of America. And at the same time claiming these federal agents could be granted immunity to prosecution and that they had committed any misconduct at all. Why do you give someone immunity if you're not guilty? Oh yes. A man by the name of James G. McAdams III, a United States attorney who covered up this BNL, and this is the case that's against the Credit Corporation where they transferred these chemicals to Iraq, was also the same individual who covered up the Noriega case. He was moved to West Palm Beach, Florida, right down by Boca Raton, to cover up the Gulf War illness. Janet Reno was then moved to Washington, D.C. from Miami. All you have to do is read the book Vote Scam to get some background on what happened. She became Attorney General. She was also used to cover up this Iraqi incident of the chemical biological agents. Janet Reno appointed John Hogan, counselor, to investigate and present the BNL Task Force report on this Iraq controversy, the Gulf War illnesses. Now, Mr. Hogan, an attorney, was also from Miami, and he represented the Barbudis. That, to me, is a conflict of interest. He represented the terrorists that the same United States government proved were terrorists and who supplied these weapons of mass destruction to the country of Iraq to kill Americans. None of this makes sense unless there is a conspiracy in the midst of our government. The only major portion of Mr. Hogan's B&L report, and this cost American taxpayers millions of dollars. The only portion that had anything to do with this report that would link the terrorists in Boca Raton with the Iraqi government and the federal agents in the United States is blacked out when you ask for documents under the Freedom of Information Act. It's considered national security. So they are protected by the national security, and yet they're terrorists. And they've also blacked out the information on Ihsan Barghouti and his IBI Corporation. Why? If there is nothing wrong with them and there is no illegal activity. What is our government trying to hide from the citizens of this country? How can terrorists be protected by the United States government? Why would they do it unless our government supplied them the chemicals and the facilities to produce the agents of mass production? Why has IBI, Ihsan Barghouti International, not been prosecuted when they've got all the evidence? Videos, cassette tapes, fax transmissions, telephone conversations that were recorded. Unless Barghouti and his Barghouti International works for the United States government. That's just a question. I think Americans have a right to ask questions. All of this has to do with the fourth horse in the book of Revelation. Because when pestilence goes all over the world, where does it start? There has to be a historical time when these things are engineered in the laboratories and unleashed upon the world's population. This PIT plant was taken over by the RTC. Remember, that's the Receiving and Holding Corporation to sell homes when something goes into bankruptcy. And now it's owned by Century Arms International. And they flew a British flag over that building in Boca Raton, Florida, until Peter Kawaja once again exposed the Century Arms International, its background and its ties with the CIA and the British MI6, their intelligence agency. This is big stuff. This is information that if it was released by ABC would have toppled the government of the United States. To be exact, the BBC has contacted Peter Kawaja 3 times trying to get him to let them make documentaries of all this, and he's refused. The city of Boca Raton water utilities have admitted that they've been performing periodic water sample tests from the plant, PIT plant. After all of these years, they discovered there was cyanide in the water. So what did they do? They went into the PIT plant and filled up all the drains with concrete, cement. The sworn affidavit by federal agents prove that warfare-grade free cyanide was dumped into the city's water supply. And they knew it since 1990, but it was kept secret from the citizens of Boca Raton. Kawaja received several telephone calls and inquiries from people who lived and worked south of this PIT plant. And they knew of other people in the area also that were now in hospitals, brain dead and dying from cancer. Former member of Congress Dan Micah, some of you might recognize that name, who was a business associate of Henry Kissinger, was in attendance at lavish dinners with other dignitaries when the son of Ish'an Barbuti, Haidar Babuti, said that they were going to dump cyanide into the water supplies of the United States of America and referred to it as sayonara. That's all he said. Did Mr. Dan Micah ever come forward and tell the American people there were Iraqi terrorists that were planning on killing them through their water supplies? No. Doctors Garth and Nancy Nicholson, both PhDs, have published their report concerning all of this. And it was featured in Criminal Politics magazine, where they described how Dr. Nancy Nicholson almost died from the Gulf War illnesses. Their cat also contracted this particular disease from their stepdaughter, who was a Gulf War veteran. They've made the tie with George Bush, James Baker III, and chemical biological weapons that were genetically engineered. They were man-made, identified as Mycoplasma incognitus, one of the Gulf War illnesses syndromes found in all the Desert Storm veterans. This warfare agent was being tested on death row prison inmates in Huntsville, Texas. 350 prison employees came down with the Gulf War illness syndrome in a modern day outbreak in a prison facility. Armed Defense Intelligence agents entered the M.D. Anderson Cancer Center and threatened the administration not to allow the Nicholsons to continue their research on the Gulf War illness syndrome, nor to allow them to talk publicly. Why would they do that? Unless there is a gigantic cover-up taking place. The Veterans Administration's hard files evidence on the Gulf War illness syndrome were moved to the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, and they unfortunately were destroyed in that bombing. Too bad. The Department of Defense now claims that some of the NBC, nuclear, biological, chemical logs were also accidentally destroyed in that particular explosion in Oklahoma City. Too many coincidences, and yet the American people accepts these things so gullibly. The Gulf War illness is a communicable disease. So says Doctors Garth and Nancy Nicholson. So says Joyce Riley, registered nurse, who is fighting this with the government of the United States. It is spreading much faster than AIDS by casual, non-sexual contact. Now can we begin to see Revelation chapter 6, verse 5 or verse 7 and 8, when they open the fourth horse and he began to run, and then he's now beginning a slow gallop across the earth. And this, remember, was spread into 28 countries. 28 nations had representatives under the United Nations flag there in the military. And every single one of those countries, their people have been coming down with the same illness. All the same symptoms. This being contacted through perspiration or by close contact with someone that coughs in your face. This is airborne. Did anybody go see the movie Outbreak? Could it be the government of the United States and those insiders in the Illuminati literally have been producing movies now over the last 10 years, showing us what it's going to be and rubbing it in our face because there's nothing we can do about it? God prophesied it in the Bible. It's going to happen. It will happen. But you see, there are things that we can do about it, as I'll discuss as I close the message today. Your children can actually be infected. And I don't want to scare anybody, but they could be infected at a playground or at a school where a veteran coming back and has children, and they hug them, and maybe they were carriers or sick with the illness themselves and pass it on to their children. Mycoplasma incognitus contains 40% of the HIV/AIDS envelope. It will not give you AIDS itself, but it contains 40% of the total package that produces AIDS in an individual. So this means this was tampered with by human beings in laboratories if they put 40% of the HIV virus envelope in this biological agent. It is a warfare agent by design to reduce populations of whole nations. Our government, unfortunately, and I hate to say it to all starry-eyed Americans who believe that our government can do no wrong, is involved in this great crime and cover-up. A nationwide, even worldwide panic is going to be created. That's by design, of such a magnitude that it will threaten our very existence as a population on planet Earth. This same government will then step in to offer a solution. Haven't I said that since early in the 1980s when this ministry started? You create a problem, then you furnish the solution when the population goes along with your ideas. Therefore, they gain greater control because, you see, they will offer the solution. They will have an antidote treatment. But who's going to get it? Only those who will accept the medical or national ID card that Hillary Clinton wants everybody to have, and Bill Clinton has held up in public, will then be treated. All others will be considered a danger and a threat to society. All others will be hunted down, imprisoned, or killed, or left to die on their own. Americans will then welcome this solution. They'll turn in their neighbors. They'll turn in their friends in order to survive and receive their treatment. At the same time, this instrument will suspend the Constitution of the United States. It's a possibility because things are so bad. And if there is a nuclear strike, if there is unleashed and it just continues to grow, this war, viruses, bacteria, Gulf War syndrome, then the President of the United States must do something for its people. So he might have to suspend the Constitution, because after all, the Constitution is the number one enemy of those who are trying to create world government. As long as our Constitution protects us and we're not under a tyranny and a dictatorship, we can fight against world government. But if they suspend the Constitution, Then they will allow the United Nations to rule, and they will send in their medical help. It will be a benign treatment. It will be something that will be so welcomed by the major population until they find out this is world order. This is world government. America is now enslaved. But it'll be too late then. They will have the military. We will have nothing. The United Nations will be in control. And this will be sold to the American people by the mass media, just as it was in Nazi Germany before World War II, so that Hitler could become a dictator over the people. It'll be sold so slick and so smooth by the ad agencies that create the programming for America, that the American people who do not have access to this information will swallow it hook, line, and sinker. And those on the far right who would dare believe that Waco and Ruby Ridge and Oklahoma City was some kind of a conspiracy of government agents, and then the killing of the Prime Minister of Israel, Rabin, was anybody who would literally say that that was a conspiracy by the far right and deny it, they're the ones who are going to be the enemies of the state. Because you see, there is a worldwide media exposure now that no matter what crime is committed in what nation, it's always the far right. The ones who do not want to give up their country and their sovereignty for world government. That's why the man in Israel was taken into captivity so quickly. That was what was released to the press. He was a far right extremist who said Rabin was giving away their country. What did Bill Clinton say about the far rightists, the patriots, the constitutionalists, those that believe in Bible prophecy? What are they? They're the ones who say we're giving up our sovereignty. So they're lumping everybody into the same category. Approximately 40% from confidential sources inside the government of the United States say that 40% of the population is already a carrier of one form or another of the HIV virus. That's what the Center for Disease Control, those on the inside, say. Because there's now over 2,000 plus strands that are not lethal, but some are. And when you combine that with now the deadly Gulf War illness and syndrome, it won't be long till up to half the population will be in carriers to infect the other half. Example, the Ebola restin virus. This is a slow-acting, deadly agent, taking years to manifest itself to the population, killing you in pain, and worse than the Ebola Zaire virus, which is a very quick-acting virus. Yet the government is already leaking stories through the mainstream media and movies warning America not if, but when the worldwide outbreak takes place. They're preparing you and me and the rest of the population that they already have it planned. It's just a matter of when, not if. And anytime they plan something, it will happen, whether you and I like it or not. So what they're saying, however, is that this will happen by accident. It won't be something planned. It'll be because of international air travel. And people are taking it from one country to the other by air travel. Didn't we see that in the movie Outbreak? where it ended up in Boston, out in California, by air travel. Someone was coughed on in one city and they flew to another city. Americans will believe it. America always believes in its government. They could never believe that our government has been taken over internally by socialist communists who are working for a one-world government. Brethren, what can you and I do about this? What if the things that I have stated to you today are indeed the truth? And I believe you're going to be very surprised soon when production of evidence is right before your very eyes in this auditorium. Turn with me in Psalms chapter 91 in conclusion of my message today. You and I must be a different type of person on planet Earth. When all of these things begin to happen, in Psalms 91 it says, starting in verse 1, "He that dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty." That's where you and I want to be. We want to be in the secret place of the Most High. In Revelation chapter 12, it calls it a place of safety. We term it that. It's called a place in the wilderness where the woman is going to go, where God is going to supernaturally protect certain individuals. Verse 2, "I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom will I trust." This is the one, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, the living Savior, and His Father and our Father. That's who we can trust in. We cannot trust in men. We can't trust in the words of government that creates deadly, massive, destructive biological agents in a laboratory and then sets other governments to use them against our own people and then spreads them around the world. Verse 3, "Surely He will deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence." And what is the biological agents other than pestilence? "He shall cover you with His feathers, and under His wings shall you trust. His truth shall be your shield and buckler." His truth. Whatever His truth is, you can count on it. Not man, but God's truth. Verse 5, "You shall not be afraid for the terror by night. No, when the nuclear missiles come flying, you won't have to be afraid by night if that's when they come. Nor for the arrow that flies by day, if they come in the daytime," and you can see it. And CNN plots these nuclear missiles coming over the poles because they don't have a camera crew on site for the launching. And here they have their graphics showing they're coming America, and it's coming to New Orleans, St. Louis to wipe out Scott Air Force Base, to wipe out the military base, Army base in Granite City across the street or across the river, and then McDonnell Douglas Corporation. It's going to hit these places. You don't have to be afraid. No, I'm God. I will warn you in advance and give you opportunity to leave the area. And then if you don't, your blood will be upon your own head. But I will warn you in advance. I've always warned my people and given them a way out if they only listen. Verse 6, "Nor for the pestilence that walks in darkness, nor for the destruction that wastes at noonday." Do these bacteriological agents always work only at a specific time and then go off the clock? No, they work 24 hours a day. And that's exactly what's going to happen. Verse 7, "1,000 shall fall at your side and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not come nigh or near to you." We want to be those people that have our confidence in God so much so that He will guarantee that not one thing will happen when we see people falling on our right and on our left hand, when we drive down the streets and we see ambulances coming in and taking more and more people to the hospitals, and they're dying because they would not accept the New World Order. We won't have to worry about that, because our great God said, yes, I have confidence in you. You're obeying me. You're living by my words. I've warned you. You've acted accordingly. You now are under the palm of my hand. You're under the feathers of the wings of the great eagle that will take my church into the wilderness. And they'll be protected from all these things. Look at verse 8. Only with your eyes shall you behold and see the reward of the wicked. Those on planet Earth that will not obey God, that will not listen to the leadership of the Holy Spirit of God, are going to see the reward of the wicked, and we will only see it with our eyes. And that's what I'm talking about today. You and I are going to have to bend our knees. We're going to have to bend our wills and our minds to the living Jesus Christ, so that He will reckon us worthy to escape these things. Because I'm telling you, by the authority of Jesus Christ, it says in Revelation 6, the 4 horsemen are going to ride planet Earth. They're going out. There's going to be pestilence, and they're man-made pestilences that are right now beginning to gallop across planet Earth in at least 28 nations. And they'll be airborne and go into other nations. And no one on planet Earth will be exempt unless you come under the hand, the protective hand of Jesus Christ and God our Father. Verse 9, because you have made the Lord, which is my refuge, even the Most High, your habitation, there shall no evil befall you, neither shall any plague come nigh your dwelling. Brethren, these verses are for the last of the age. It's for the time when the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, when the mark of the beast is going to be enforced. God is going to provide a way for those that literally are listening to the Holy Spirit of Jesus Christ and God our Father today. He wants to protect. He longs to protect those that are His. But you and I have to be submissive. We have to listen. Verse 11, for He shall give His angels charge over you, to keep you in all your ways. Can you bank on Jesus Christ? Yes, you can. He's going to transmit His angels across the vastness of the universe and place them around you and me and other people like us all over the world that are God's people, and they're living His life over inside of them by the power of the Holy Spirit, and they will yield to Him. Those angels are going to be there as ministering spirits, and your Bible and my Bible says so. Verse 12 says, they shall bear you up in their hands, lest you dash your foot against a stone. You shall tread upon the lion and the adder, the young lion and the dragon shall you trample under feet. Because He hath set His love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. I will set him on high, because he has known my name. He shall call upon me, and I'll answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. With long life will I satisfy him and show him my salvation. Brethren, the last thing I wanted to mention in that dream or vision which one person in this room sitting here today had, one thing that thundered into his mind was, behold, I am the Lord. I come quickly. Let no man take your crown. Those were the words that stuck in his mind when he saw that vision. And brethren, I end this sermon by saying, let no man take your crown.